Thank you all for your patience. We are welcoming a room full of people into the space right now. I will show you over here. So we are going to be showing some videos today. Natalia is going to start us off. I'm going to grab the link that we are going to be sharing in this room and put it in the chat. And that is what we're going to be doing.
Welcome to Joint Laser, Leonardo Art and Science Evening Rendezvous, Silent Laser and Laser, Arizona State University. Today's discussion is the fermentation in conjunction with FS14 ferment and the festival Emerge 2022, Eating at the Edges, a festival of food futures. Asu-Cyland is very happy to collaborate with Laser ASU on today's talk and dive into exploration of fermentation through the dual lenses of art and science, and its broader metaphorical meaning and possibilities it offers. As we know, fermented beverages in many ancient cultures were of considerable social, religious, and medical significance because of their perceived pharmacological, nutritional, and sensory benefits. They played an important role in the development of human culture and technology, contributing to the advance of agriculture and food preservation. The fermentation process sometimes was considered a miracle. In ancient cultures, there were deities in charge of wine or beer. The ancient Egyptians worshipped Osiris. The Greeks honored Dionysus. One of the topics for today is how can we apply and examine the process of fermentation both as the medium and approach to visual art. Can fermentation be used as a modification of matter to create new readings, meanings, and hybrid forms and environments in visual, digital, and sound art? So let's explore the exhibition Ferment at Hey Art Cultural Center at Yerevan, Armenia. Thank you for exploring these hybrid fermented environments and the works that expand and challenge medium and content, viewers' experiences and interactions, exploring the creative process and our ways of constructing meanings. The process of fermentation can be associated with visual arts on several metaphorical levels, as well as the broader metaphorical possibilities arriving from etymological roots of the word fermentation, indicating the state of agitation. So let me end with the quote from Vasily Kandinsky. In one of his autobiographical texts, Kandinsky wrote about the influence of science on his ideas about the world and his art, as well as the state of creative agitation. I quote, "A pure scientific event removed one of the most important obstacles from my path. It was the smashing of the atom that equated in my soul with the collapse of the whole world. Suddenly, the stouted walls crumbled. Everything became uncertain. All the forms that I ever used would come to me by themselves. Sometimes they kept away long and hard, and I had to wait patiently, and often with the fear in my heart for them to ripen in me. This inner ripening defy observation. They are mysterious, and they depend on the hidden causes. Only it is if one could feel on the soul surface a vague internal fermentation, a special tensing of inner forces, that more and more clearly foretell the coming of the joyful hour. Sometimes it will last for a moment and sometimes for days on end. I believe that this mental process of fertilization, ripening of fruit, labor, and birth quite correspond to the physical process of conception and birth of a human being. It could be that the world's also born this way." End of quote. So let's continue exploring the fermentation process here in Arizona, in a newly built Mix Art Center, as well as let's explore a wide range of cultural, scientific, ethical, philosophical, and aesthetic perspective it offers in the upcoming special December issue of the Leonardo journal Ferment. Thank you.
And I have the next video that we're going to be watched. That is Sara Al-Sayed, who is a faculty member here at ASU. She is the co-director of the Biomimicry Institute. And I'm going to play this video the same way I played the last one.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sara Al-Sayed, and today I will be talking to you about a research I did called Follow the Ferments, Inclusive Food Governance in Arizona. I am co-director of the Biomimicry Center and assistant research professor at the Swedish Center for Sustainable Food Systems. So fermentation got me really to get very interested in microbes and got me to see them in a new light as companions to humans. Not only throughout our body, but as necessary for the functioning of our gut, our brain, and many more parts. Right now, as I'm talking, I have a batch of water kefir that is bubbling. Very excited about working with fermented foods. And drinks. We are 10 times microbial cells than we're human cells. And this made me think that we're really never alone. We're always in community with all the microorganisms. Not only this, fermenting these foods got me to see how we can continue to nourish this community within our foods through these microbes. It made me really imagine that there are these many connections to others, these webs of microbes that kind of connect us to each other, nourishing us, our gut, our soils, making these healthier communities. And then my research got me to start looking at this idea of what is good food. In particular, I focused in arid regions, and I honed in on traditional food practices and started seeing these intersections between traditional food practices and nature-inspired practices and processes. Through conducting a series of interviews and literature review, I kind of developed this framework. And this framework takes inspiration from traditional ecological knowledge, also known as indigenous knowledge, and it was woven in with the principles of life that are derived from the field of biomimicry. And through that, I conceptualized a regenerative food system. This is part of the framework. I'm not going to go into details of it, but the idea is that these principles are kind of matched up together. Principles from life's principles, which are the green ones, and then the brown ones are traditional ecological knowledge. Now, to hone in for this research, one such principle is low energy processes that are found in nature, metabolic reactions, photosynthesis, different things like that. And there's a matching similarity, which is that there's often in traditional practices preservation and conservation techniques, ways to maintain foods longer and give them a longer shelf life, more digestibility, and many other things. And in these practices are traditional fermented foods. So here there's a number of pictures of kimchi and sourdough and cheeses and kombucha. These are just some of these microbial ferments that actually increase, digestibility, flavor, and often allow us to eat foods out of season using very low technologies in ways that are not necessarily harmful to the environment. And so in presenting my research and my paper, I am going to take you through generic steps of what a fermented process looks like. So often there's a preparation. So you're gathering your ingredients. These could be cabbage that is washed, or making sourdough, you're getting your flours and your starter. And then you go into a process of backslopping bacteria. So you're bringing in an inoculum of bacteria. So this could be a sourdough starter, or it could be an old yogurt starter, or it could just be making sure that you have organic cabbage that has its own bacteria growing on it. Then there's a process of feeding and fermenting. So you're allowing the natural processes of these microbes to do their thing and continue the fermentation process. And then there's often some kind of a sensing or making some kind of adjustments. You might, make sure you're burping your kimchi, or you might find, that we need some more flour, or, whatever different adjustments. And then in the end, come together and share it. And so through these steps, I'm actually going to be presenting different steps of this paper that I put together. So the first step is the preparation. And in that, I'm going to be talking to you about my context and methodology. So just to understand the space that we live in, the US sits within a regulatory industrial framework that came about in the past 100 years to kind of regulate how food is protected. And that came about as a more industrialized food system was being created. So this is where the Food and Drug Administration got created, its food code standardization, and most recently the Food Safety Modernization Act, all ways to try and protect our food from contamination and even death. However, these systems don't take into account necessarily any traditional or indigenous practices. And so as a counter to that, a different kind of movement has grown of trying to understand specifically on a microbial level, what are the microbiopolitical contexts that we could be learning from. So what is a different narrative to the existing Pasteurian view that emphasizes that we need to eliminate microbes that are hitching a ride on foods? So fermentative processes really highlight these entanglements, these complexities and boundaries. And microbiopolitics really illustrates these entanglements between humans and microorganisms. So there's this movement of post-Pasteur microbiopolitics, which says that we should be seeing the value of microbes and believe in cultivating cooperative relationships. And that's exactly what I kind of embarked on. And I did a multi-site ethnography called Follow the Thing. And in this case, I followed 3 different products here in Arizona. One on the left side is gundruk, Nepali fermented product. And then there's saguaro red wine, saguaro wine by the Tohono O'odham Nation. And then on the right side, muntaget and pen, which are different types of milk-produced fermented products. And in my research, I interviewed 18 people, as I said, in Arizona, Middle Eastern community, indigenous people, Nepalis, different sexes. Also, some are food producers and some are home cooks. A large majority of them were above 35 years. So that's kind of my context. Now, for the backslopping, the inoculating the bacteria, this is where I'm going to tell you about these different products. So the first one is gundruk, and gundruk is produced, as I said, by Nepalis, traditionally in Nepal, but there's a large Nepali population here in Arizona, and missing this food that they have, there's some families that make it, and so you get some leafy greens like mustard greens, they get washed and then they get pounded and then they're sun-dried. And then after that, the liquid is removed from them, then they're placed in jars and they are fermented for several weeks. And then they are again sun-dried one more time and then stored to be used in soups and salads and so forth. So that's one product. The other is saguaro wine, which is produced from the saguaro fruit. The Tohono O'odham Nation will harvest it in the summer, and then they will bring a pulp out of it. Some of it will be used to make syrups and jellies, but part of it will be used to produce this ceremonial wine. So it's not a wine to be sipped or drank, it's to create certain ceremonies. And last, this is a picture of a Jordanian woman who's making these milk products. One is called jamid, and basically it is yogurt pasteurization and then drying of this cheese, and then it's placed in olive oil. So these are the 3 products that I was following, and through those, I tried to understand kind of like what is the context that they're living in. And I identified certain thematics. So for the gundruk, food safety really was highlighted. Again, you know, these FDA regulations are made for large-scale productions and really focusing on these Pasteurian contexts. And within that framework, gundruk would not be a food that could be easily exchanged or marketed because it doesn't fit within the safety guidelines. Yet, in the production of gundruk, there are cultural guidelines of how to make it safely that include washing in certain ways, actual steps of sun drying and so forth. And even the idea of not cross-contaminating are all aspects that are culturally ingrained of how to make sure that it is actually safe. But these would not fit within the regulatory structures. When we talk about the saguaro wine, one of the big challenges for indigenous communities is the idea of food sovereignty, the process of reclaiming cultural foods, a movement that many tribes are striving for, but yet many tribes are not even able to claim those foods as part of food programs that they have. And then there's the added layer of sacred foods, like this drink, that, you know, indigenous communities actually do not want to be commercialized or known, for example. And then lastly, the idea of translocality. So Arab communities immigrated here, migrant communities, there's a strong sense of identity, but yet there's a loss of this identity within the younger generations as means of assimilating. And so older generations are trying to encourage this idea of translocality, which is that as migrant communities come to a new place, how can we continue to have some of these foods with us? So in conclusion of all of this, what am I trying to propose? What are some of these adjustments and changes that I'm trying to propose? How can we think about a more inclusive food governance? What I'm suggesting is that we should be thinking how we can bring these regenerative foods, these traditional foods that actually help restore health and are part of a larger regenerative net positive practices. And through doing that, we need to bring in some food education. How can we get consumers aware about the biodiversity of all these foods, be it indigenous communities or even migrant ones? And how can we maybe create some different types of labels that actually recognize some of these activities? For example, in Italy, there is a label for Presidia by the Slow Food Organization that actually is made by the producers themselves rather than a big regulatory structure. And finally, when talking about microbes, there are ways of actually testing microbial communities and health and so forth. However, this tech is very expensive. So how can we make tech that could be accessible easily to small scale communities? And in finishing this off, sharing and coming together, I do not claim that, what I'm trying to say is that we should move away from an industrialized food system. This will continue to exist. But what I'm merely suggesting is that we should create a bit more space for alternatives, for microbes, and enable some diversity that allows us to actually have a more equitable and safe space for traditional foods to flourish. To end, here are some links if you're interested to read more about this, and a link to a podcast. Thank you very much for listening to me.
All right. Thank you for those of you that have joined via Zoom and are with us and have watched the video that we just put in the chat. So now we have artist Anne-Marie with us, and she is in the Zoom presently. So Anne-Marie, you should have full host abilities to share, and I believe that we should be able to see it in the physical space here as well. So if you could give it a shot, that would be great.
I'm going to present a bit of my work, and I gave it the title, The Garden of Knowledge. And so it's on fermentation and art science collaborations. So actually, as fermentation, I don't want to specify and to focus only on food, but I rather think of fermentation as a metabolic process of converting one process into another. And usually it's through the intervention of bacteria or other microorganisms. The fermentation processes, all of them, they require nutrition and time, and they release a lot of energy when it's good fermentation. And when the process involves living cultures, it's about life and death also often. Parasitic and autonomous life is involved. But fermentations can also take place symbolically. For example, in art and science collaborations. And in my short presentation, I will discuss both meanings by illustrating my artistic research and my collaborations with scientists. So I focus on my rooftop garden, which is my laboratory. It's my training ground to develop my creativity, and it enables me to have an active dialogue with living material. It's a space where thinking and manual work go hand in hand, and it connects the visible with the invisible. And it brings also together the making and performing. So my art is based on a collaboration with living organisms such as plants, insects, and bacteria. I research natural networks and dynamic ecosystems they are part of. Complementary to my training as an artist, my studies in botany provide a solid basis for this artistic research. And the resulting artworks, they have all their own behavior, metabolism, and agency. The installations and sculptures grow, they communicate, sense, smell, and react. They are evolving performances where each installation has its own lifetime, creating a landscape on the border between natural life and science. So, my rooftop garden, it's an open green, but there are many more open greens. I see open greens as marginal zones where culture and nature overlap and where they enter into a symbiotic relationship. I would like to focus on the role that these open greens can play in the conservation of biodiversity in the cities. Especially my rooftop garden is in a city, Brussels, in the center of Brussels. And the functionality of the open greens in terms of habitats for wild plants, for insects, and for birds, because all these things are my basis for good fermentation with the non-human. If we want to live in a city and in a different way, we will have to change our ideas on what is most essential and necessary to our lives. We have to break with the common rules and deviate from the norm and create dynamic structures. My Open Greens project researches different bottom-up approaches for designing artificial environments that have the stability and the diversity of natural ecosystems. And hereby I focus thus on my rooftop garden. Integration of renewable energy systems, energy efficiency in food and gardening systems, natural building, rainwater harvesting, and urban planning, along with the economic, political, and the social policies that make sustainable living possible and practical. Food sovereignty is crucial also in this new way of living. Therefore, I experiment with an edible forest garden on my rooftop. Imagine yourself surrounded by trees, bushes, and herbs, all ready to pick and to put in your mouth. Forest gardening is based on natural models from all times. It is a self-supporting, healthy, and fertile system in which useful plants with edible and medicinal qualities grow together in different vertical layers and have beneficial effects on each other. This is my rooftop garden on a parking lot in the center of Brussels. It is 750 square meters. Sorry, I didn't calculate how much this is in ecological, but maybe you can have an idea yourself. So I started with this in 2009, and it's changed already a lot since the beginning, which makes sure for me that once that we humans build the whole world with stones and everything, but once that we will not exist anymore, nature will quickly take over again. I'm sure of that. Nature will never die. In my rooftop garden, I also collaborate, what I said already, with non-human beings, and an important non-human being is my bees. I have several beehives. I work with my bees also since 2009. Actually, I created my rooftop garden for my bees, and I monitor them all the since 2009, and I learned a lot of it. I work with scientists on the monitoring, not only of the bees, but also of the garden itself. I monitor all biotic and abiotic elements in the garden. Here you see an example of the rooftop garden in the very beginning, where I do this kind of edible forest gardening, but on the low basis here. Later, I added some trees, all fruit trees, berries, edible things, a lot of ivy also for the bees because it's super important. There is compost. I have greenhouses, 2 greenhouses, and yeah, all what is necessary to do my experiments. My rooftop garden, this is also my studio, and I also have a physical studio built on my rooftop garden. Of course, there is also a big part of fermenting, but my fermentation focuses mainly on the byproducts of the fermentation, namely the skin that you can grow, that is grown by bacteria. And here you see a little bit of the skin. These fermentations were drinkable fermentations, but often I do experiments with non-drinkable fermentations that I color with all kinds of extracts from plants in the fermentation, like hibiscus, nettles, a lot of different things that also give color to the skins. Here you see like an experimental beehive, and in the background, the city of Brussels, and to the left, the ivy for my bees. But in every fieldwork part, like for example, my rooftop garden, there is also an outcome in artistic installations, mainly installations. And this, for example, is a reenactment or a remake of my rooftop garden inside in an exhibition, but in the sense of some kind of biosphere, because there is no window at all, and everything is artificial. And this is what interested me a lot, like to study and to monitor the growth in an artificial environment compared to my rooftop garden, which is, of course, outside. For this installation, I collaborated with the people from that city where the festival was taking place. They all came with vegetables that we planted together in the 200 square meter inside garden. There were 4 different zones, like a Mediterranean zone, a herbal and medicinal plant zone, a vegetable zone, and a forest garden zone. And in this installation, I put some poems with video poems from small events that I filmed in my rain garden. Another important part of my work is, so as I said already, the bees. This project, I call it Bee Agency. And my Bee Agency projects should be seen as an open framework for research and collaborations on, with scientists, technologists, and other artists, but also with non-humans, so the bees, and also bacteria. I am observing and monitoring the activities and the behavior of my honeybees in relation to the urban environment. And I work with the data to make sense of these data together with scientists and to take information from the environment. I have actually 2 bee observatories that are close to each other, like 500 meters apart. And those are both located in the center of Brussels. And several of these beehives, they were installed in the gardens, and the bees, they managed to bridge the spatial distance and associate the locations by going about their business and natural processes within their individual but overlapping territories, because they can fly like 3 to 5 kilometers apart. They overlap and they meet each other in their own territories. So the presence and the activities of the bee colonies interconnect the gardens. The emerging interspace can be perceived as a place of encounters and neighborhoods. This is the greenhouse in one of the gardens that I use as a space to research and to work with all elements from the garden. Here I am studying under the microscope a lot of seeds that I collected from the previous harvests, also dead bees, but also pollen from the flowers, because this is one of the projects that I did in my bee agency overall project. What you see here is a transparent beehive that I had set up for a whole bee season, for a whole year, in a small studio in the other garden. And this transparent beehive, I set it up to show people how a bee colony works from close by. Because a lot of people, they don't know how a bee colony actually works. So normally when there was nobody, the colony was covered. But when people were visiting, I could take off the cover and show all the frames that were enhanced with contact microphones, piezo microphones, that you can see here on the right. And the bees, they were slowly building their comb in the box on the microphones, and they were walking over the microphones all the time, which gave a specific sound. And this sound was picked up by the microphones 12 times. And so I could mix and make a soundscape made by the bees and mixed by myself. This was like really very nice installation to see in real time. The bees working and buzzing, they fly in and out via this tube that you can see on the left. The tube is going via the window. So they fly in and out, and they make their own sound by this live movie that you can see over the whole year. This is another project that I did with the bees. I collected pollen in the beehive, in the several beehives, but also immediately on the flowers in the garden. And then I studied this pollen under the scanning electron microscope with scientists from the University in Brussels. And we tried to match the pollen that we specifically knew, because I have taken them from the specific flowers, with the pollen that I collected in the beehive. But you see here, for example, in the middle row to the right, a pollen from sunflowers, pollen from mint plants, pollen from borage, and these are mixed with some parts of a dissected honey, like for example here on the top left, we see the pollen comb with which the bees are combing the pollen in their pollen baskets. Here in the middle we have a piece of the mouth part of the bees. The mouth part, which is very, very specific and very complex, like bees can suck, but they also can sweep and drink the nectar as a dog does with its tongue. Here to the left, we have a bee tongue. This is only like 1 millimeter of the 6 millimeter long top of the bee. It's the last millimeter. And in this tongue, you can see, so there are a lot of hairs for licking and sucking. In the middle, we have the tube, but you also see a lot of small dust pollution that the bees pick up in the air, that they pick up when they are foraging on flowers and so on. All these irregular little rocks or pollution particles. And when you know that this is only 1 millimeter, then you can imagine how much dust particles a bee must collect in its fur that is also even electrostatic laden. So these little animals, they really are very, it's very problematic for them to live in places where there is a lot of dust. And this is one of the reasons that in the beehives, that the bees get contaminated and that they can die because these dust particles are spreading so fast. And like studying this under the microscope, I started to think about possibilities of helping the bees with things that lie in my possibility. Of course, as a human, I can offer them or try to offer them maybe a good resort or place where that is still to measure to their needs. So I studied a lot of papers. This process is described in a paper that was published in Leonardo, Dialectics of Nature. I wrote it together with Dennis Dollens. He's an American architect from Santa Fe. And I studied the bees and he studied the buildings, and we both tried to find solutions actually in the bacterial world to help as well building as bee building in a better way. And I started for that from the form of a pollen of white strawberry, which you can see here. This is a beehive that is designed after a pollen form of a wild strawberry. And it made me think a little bit of a backpack. You see it better here to the left, like it has the forms of a backpack. And I studied and I researched a lot on this model of beehive, which this one is a very big one, made in wood, and it's made in a fab lab with lasered out design in the form of this coral design. I hope that lichen will soon grow on it, because lichen is also a pollution sensor, and with this lichen growing on the outside of this beehive, I will be able also to measure the pollution of the environment. But in the meantime, I also was studying this by growing cyanobacteria biofilms around the beehive. But first, I will tell a little bit about this project, because this is also like a connected project between Brussels. This is the beehive in Brussels, and this beehive is in Hamburg in Germany. It's in the port of Hamburg. You can see it there. It's on the top of a pillar that was made to fix the boats. And we welded the beehive really there on top. But next to it is a park where the bees can find a lot of food, and where also the people can go for walking and for sporting and so on. So it's a very quiet neighborhood next to the river. But the river has rather huge tides, it's going up and down by 4 meters difference. And actually, the metal pillars here, they are fixed, of course, because the bees, they don't like very much the movement. But the humans looking at the hive, they are on a ponton that goes up and down. So sometimes you come very close to the beehive and you can see the bees flying in and out because the hole is here on the bottom. And sometimes you are very far off the hive. Here you see the bees, like how they enter. And of course, there was like, I integrated a monitoring system with a camera that was monitoring the whole time the flight hole here. But there are also some sensors connected inside. And then in a restaurant on the ponton, the visitors, they were able to follow the development of the bee colony by seeing the bees flying in and out, the activity of the colony, and also related to the temperature and to the humidity, as well in Hamburg as in Brussels. So we could compare the two locations. And going from my bees, I go back to the garden and to my lab for form and matter, which is mainly a laboratory for experimenting with organic materials. And these organic materials, I transform them in sensorial skins, but also in tapestries, membranes, and biofilms, as I told before, to observe the pollution around the beehive. But these biofilms here, it's more in an artistic way that I work with them. And this is also the project that I presented in the SciFest Festival in Yerevan a month ago, for example. So I start from the fermentation of kombucha. Here we see the kombucha skin, the skin on top of the kombucha, but I make very large aquariums. They can be like 1 meter on 1 meter or even bigger than that. So I grow them in my studio and for a few weeks, and then I harvest the skins. Here we see very well the activity of the fermentation that releases oxygen, the bacteria on top. Here on top we have the skin that is woven by the bacteria. It's a cellulose skin. And here on the bottom we see the threads of the yeast that is converting the sugars in the tea into alcohol. I also made a small installation of this here in this strange object, where I was measuring the fermentation processes in sound, in ultrasound, in temperature, and in changing of pH, because when the fermentation processes, the pH will lower slowly. Here at the right, we see again the small model of the beehive that is tailored after this design of the wild strawberry pollen. And that it's like a concept that can be hung on a tree or on a wall, a concept of a resort for the bees, where the bees can enter through this tube and be monitored by the camera. And all this is powered by solar panel. And there is in the pocket, in the right pocket, a small Raspberry Pi computer to make everything work. So the purpose is actually to offer a refuge to the bee colony and monitor them at the same time, but so without disturbing them. Here we see it from the sides. So it's a combination of organic stuff because the whole beehive, the skin and everything is made from kombucha skin. And then we have a 3D printed material in bioplastics. And we have all the electronics that are necessary to monitor. This is a shot from installation shot from the sensorial skins in Yerevan. All these skins are so grown by the bacteria, and they are colored by pigments from plants in the garden. And sometimes I make experiments by putting hair in it, and yeah, I experiment with a lot of these things. And here on the four corners, you see bioplastics textiles. Actually, bioplastic is a wrong definition, I think. It's biotextiles is a better word. It's all made from food waste. From the kitchen, like coffee, used coffee grains, herbs, the fruit peels. It's all mixed up in a food processor, and then I make big textiles out of it with the pulp and some glycerin and water. Further in my laboratory, yeah, are some ingredients that I use. Cochineal also for coloring the skins. There's some experiments again with kombucha. I work also with bacteria, living bacteria for coloring fabric, which works rather well. And here to the right was a little experiment in growing a cellulose skin by bacteria, so a fermenting process during an exhibition. So this little experiment was running for 6 weeks. I started just with nothing. I put this little object that is turning constantly in the green sugar tea that was inoculated by some bacteria for making kombucha, and then slowly over 6 weeks it was completely covered by a cellulose skin. This is another example of fermentation with cyanobacteria that I grow in these glass containers that are designed after a cyanobacteria itself, after the form of the cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria, they do photosynthesis. This is an antenna that catches the electron that comes from the sun to start the photosynthesis process. And then here we see so the photosynthesis happening. So also over the duration of the exhibition, the cyanobacteria colonies in these glass cells, they will start to grow. They grow rather fast. And over the duration of the exhibition, the glass cells will become darker green because the color changes as the density of the colonies becomes higher. So I designed this a little bit as some kind of tree with buds like the buds of a leaf that will start growing and opening. But as cyanobacteria are as important as leaves for us to give us oxygen, but also to take away the CO2. Here we have another process with bacteria. It's called a Winogradsky column. And Winogradsky column is a very interesting thing to monitor the activity of bacteria in the soil. So I took some soil from the rooftop garden with some rainwater and some algae that I found in the flakes of rainwater. And then after some weeks, the colonies of bacteria start to form, and they make these ever-changing designs in the column. Due to the light, when they have a lot of light or less light, everything changes. Here we have a closer look on the biotextiles. Here we can see very well, for example, this one is made with coffee. These two ones are made with lemon peels. This one is with mandarin peels. Then we have one with curry. So it's all things from the kitchen. I had avocado blended. I have passion fruit peels. Everything has its own color. Here we have sand. This one. So it's very. I'm very happy to experiment with this kind of things. It gives me a lot of pleasure. And this is one of my latest artworks that I made in the textile laboratory in the Netherlands. This is it's called the laboratory of the Textile Museum. Where they experiment with all new kinds of models or possibilities for tapestries. And this one is made after one of my sensorial skins, so the skins that I made together with bacteria in the kombucha. I photographed it, I changed it a bit in Photoshop, and then we adapted it in the software for the jacquard machine, because it's woven by a very performant weaving machine, computerized, and this represents the topography of my garden in my eyes. It's like a topographical rendering of the garden. I have 3 different tapestries. They are rather large, 2.5 meters high on 2 meters wide. And I have one in orange colors, one in green, and one in pink. And to end, I just want to talk about a performance that I did last year in Boston. This is the Belgian coast, where we had also fermented food involved in the form of algae.
Hey, Mike.
And there we put a lot of different containers in the sea, and we were working with the tides, going up and down for 6 hours. So we were working for 6 hours, bringing the jars and the metal pillars on which the jars are positioned, every time forward, back and back and back, so that the jars were just not swept away by the waves. So it was like a Sisyphus thing, always going on. But in the meantime, people were there. The people also had to move because of the tides. And we had these 2 performers that were massaging the people's hands with a scrub that we made from algae. And in the meantime, telling stories about algae, about sea organisms, and about all the beneficial things that you can have from it. And on the table here, we had the food, the drinks.
Pardon me. I think that we are going to have to conclude this part of the presentation.
It's the end of the presentation, and well, this is the food, the table, the people, and that's it.
Thank you so much. All right. So I think, Natalia?
Do we have any questions to the panelists, to the Marie or me? Or I could start with the question. Marie, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. So the digital medium today is extremely hybrid, as we all know. So what are your thoughts on the new formats and the influence of the fermentation process, as well as the ideal way of collaboration between the scientist and the artist? And how do you think we may balance and set the priority between the scientific data and the appearance of the artwork?
Is this a question for me or for everybody?
Yes, I think everyone can jump in if they would like to, or you can answer it as well.
Just to rephrase so we understand it, you're asking about the balance between the scientific inquiry and the artistic.
And artistic inquiry, and actually what's the fermentation, what the fermentation process, what fermentation process will bring, what new forms the fermentation process will bring in into the visual arts, in the visual character.
I think to start, fermentation process, I don't take it literally. I take it as a as an interesting process that can happen between an artist and a scientist, or art and science at large. So, and then of course we have the real fermentation process, which is also very interesting. But I want to talk now rather about the thing between artists and scientists. They both share the same way of being interested in experiments, in processes, and probably they look at the same process from different points of view, but this complementarity is the interesting thing, I think, in the collaboration, and with the scientists, so they can bring in something spicy for an artist that and vice versa, because both of us we have our specificities. But there should be a common ground to start with, because when there is no common ground, there cannot never be a good collaboration, I think. No. So the fermentation is really like, okay, you have the common ground, you have the spark that's there, and then the fermentation can start, and it can take place. That's how it happens with me and scientists, anyways.
I just want to say that I really appreciate the informative and inspirational that the three talks has been really insightful to see these different experiences of use scientific knowledge for the artistic endeavor, and I got just struck with how you mentioned that you has to embed new knowledge on botany or apiculture to do your work as an artist. Was really insightful. Thanks.
Thank you. I would just add in conclusion, because we're going to need to wrap up, that the question about balance and integration of art and science through fermentation is really a living equation, because fermentation is alive. It's an ongoing dynamic process. So I don't think that there's a static proportion that's the right proportion. I think that it's always going to have to be fluid, moving between art and science as a continuum and a living collaboration. It's one of the things that I found so inspiring about all the presentations, and even just the idea of fermentation as metaphor and practice of art science. I know we're going to be wrapping up. I just want to acknowledge and thank our program coordinator, Jenny Strickland, who, Grace Under Fire, was leading us through this. And I understand is so focused on bringing this great insight and energy into light that I'm giving you a chance to introduce yourself. I wouldn't want to miss that chance to do so.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you, Natalia, very much for your presentation and your moderation. And Marie, thank you so much, as well as all of our attendees from Zoom. We really appreciate you being here and sticking with us through the challenges that we faced. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you all so much for being here. And we look forward to seeing you at the next laser conversation. For those of you who are new to the concepts of lasers, they are the Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous. They now take place in over 50 cities around the globe, and you can find more information on leonardo.info/laser. Thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your day or evening.